What's up guys, Bro here, infamous brother to Mega Bro. Gonna do another tutorial for Crusader Kings 2. However, for this one I'm gonna focus on tribal government types. So playing as a tribal lord, whether it's the Norse, the Slavs, the Finns, so on and so forth. So really this whole area here. Obviously you can play, so I picked the Viking age, but you know, these are, the Irish are still tribal, the Scottish are still tribal. But usually, you know, if you're thinking tribal, you're probably going to be playing over in this area. So I just grabbed this guy just as a for demonstrative purposes. I'm going to try and go through this somewhat methodically so I don't lose you too much. Obviously, there's a lot to cover. If there's something I don't cover that you have a question about, please make a comment about it. Hopefully either myself or perhaps somebody else in the channel can maybe help you along. And if your question raises an issue that I think would require another video, then obviously I'd be more than happy to do it. But let's just dive right in here. So first we're going to talk about with regards to your character, your specific character. So what's interesting with Crusader Kings 2 is, you know, the game's very character based, right? Well, with tribal lords, you typically want someone who is very martial-esque. There's really not a lot of options available to you, I think, at least in my opinion, from a tribal standpoint, to really be to act in, you know, an intrigue way, you know, subterfuge, those sort of things. There's certainly a few options available, but for the most part what you're going to be doing is lots of warfare, which I'll show you in a moment. Notice here we have the Viking trait for this guy. This is a character trait that you are only going to get as a tribal ruler, and that's because you have to be able to raid. So I'll show you raiding towards the end of this video. But one of the ways you get this character trait, excuse me, is that you take your particular character, you stick him on a boat, or you have him go next door to somewhere else next door to you, and you have them do raiding. And I'll show you here real quick for those of you who are new to the game. You just simply right click, select your army, and then you click this little raiding thing, which means instead of fighting other armies, you just ransack the county. But you have to actually use your ruler to do that. He won't get this trait unless he himself is actually involved in the raiding, and it does take some time, so just be aware of that. But it's a pretty cool trait to have, as you can see here. Additionally, you can have concubines. So what I highly encourage you to do is not only rack up the concubines, your successor laws are going to be locked in with Gavelkind until such time as you reform your religion, which I'll explain in a moment. A lot of people don't like Gavelkind. It is a very complicated, it can be complicated anyways, to understand and predict, and can be difficult at times to control. But I will show you, I'm going to hopefully show you an illustration here of how Gavelkind works, and then maybe give you some tips on how to use it to your advantage. But my opinion with regards to Gavelkind is have as many freaking kids as you can. Alright, you do get a war score for your house for every dynasty member who owns a county and does great things in the world, which goes towards your final overall war score. Additionally, the more children that you have, the less likely you are to have one powerful competitor, because they're going to be spread out among multiple counties rather than having, you know, two in control of 3 or 4 counties. That'll make more sense to you a little bit later on in this video. But so what I do is when I look for concubines, I will go down here to characters, and I'm going to try and find females that that have certain traits, like genius, for example, and see if there's any of these. Like for her, maybe I could take her as a concubine. Yes, I can. So now what will happen is we'll have her come to court. She'll be a genius. We will procreate with her, and then hopefully produce an offspring that is a genius themselves, or at least quick, right? You can do it for strong characters. So again, strong passes down the hereditary line, hopefully. And so if you can find a woman to come to your court who is strong, the hope is that your children will also be strong, which will make them better martial. As you can see here, +2 to martial, +2 to combat skill, and so forth. As a tribal ruler, you do want to be aggressive. You want to be engaged in a lot of combat and battles, and so you want to have characters that are very effective on the martial side. So that's really the kind of first thing I think that's a key difference between tribal and feudal. And as you notice here, if you hover here, it'll tell you government type. Another key difference here is that you cannot tax your vassals. Alright, so that's pretty important. You're locked into Gavelkind succession. You cannot change that until such time as you reform your faith. You can call tribal government vassals to arms instead of using liege levies, which basically means that for the period of time that your vassals, so to speak, have troops raised, you will not suffer a negative opinion modifier from that. So, feudal, if you have your vassals raised for too long, they get pissed off with you. You don't have that issue with tribal. However, the reason for that is that you call upon your allies. So yes, they are under the vassals tab, but they are not actually... They are, but they're not your vassals. So when I say they are, but they're not your vassals as you would think of in the feudal sense. They kind of recognize you as kind of their head guy, but it's more like a confederation, right? So like this guy here is his own dude, this guy here is his own dude. They kind of recognize you as like the head honcho, but they do their own thing, right? And then if you call upon them to help defend your realm, they can kind of decide if they like you or not, and if they like you, then yeah, they'll do it. But otherwise, they don't pay you taxes, and there's no guarantee that they will raise their arms in defense of your land. So that's a really key important thing to take away from this, is that you want to keep their loyalty to you high because you don't know when you're going to need their troops. The only real no-kidding vassals as we think of with regards to like feudal vassals are your priests, and those are going to be these guys right here. Okay, so these guys are your no-kidding vassals. They're the ones that show up right here. That's why it looks like we don't have a whole lot of troops, because we have our own territory here, 1700, which I think is these three right here, and then we have the 227 from these two guys. But this number here does not include all these guys, right? So how do we determine what that is? We just hover over and it'll tell you how many troops he will provide you in the time that you request assistance. And this number will go up, just like in feudal, this number will go up the more they like you. So this guy here is going to give us, let's see here, so he can give us up to 148. If he really likes us, really respects us, he can give us up to 405 troops. Right. So that's the first big takeaway, or second or third, I can't keep up with myself. Male rulers can 3 concubines, and you can reform 2 feudal or merchant republic or ICTA if you need to, which we will speak to in a moment. I think the name of the game for tribal rulers is strength, so you want a solid martial character because you are going to be dealing with a lot of internal strife. All right. Okay, so that's kind of your just really quick brief down and dirty with regards to character-specific issues. Government type, already talked about that a little bit with regards to you're really more of a confederation of allies than you are really one solid centralized kingdom. Now you can affect that a little bit using the Realm tab. I want to say you actually can't move up this area here. Let's see your war. Yep. So, anyways, you can move these up a little bit, but you're far more constrained. Unlike feudal, where you can kind of move up. So, county tab, just really quick here. All right. So, the way this works is that you have a tribal capital. All right. You can only have one tribal, I guess, holding per county. So we can't go and say we're going to build another tribe here. We just can't do that. It won't let us do it. We can only have one per. But then the amount of troops that you can raise, in this case 771, is directly correlated to the number of holdings that you have. So, for example, we can raise 771 troops here because we have 4 holdings. That's fewer than here because we have 3 holdings. So see 561? That partly has to do with the fact that we have 4 open holdings here, and therefore we can raise a lot more troops. So one of the things you want to look for when you're expanding your kingdom is holdings that have lots of these right here. So you can see here 750, 846 because he's got 4 holdings plus this is capital, and he's got 4 holding there, so that's pretty good actually. Alright, so that's one takeaway is open holdings. This determines dictates the amount of troops that you can raise. Another thing to be aware of is that your troops are always going to be, for the most part, light infantry. I think that partly has to do with your technological issues. You just don't have as much technology as the feudal lords do. Your troops are really built for raiding and quick kind of skirmish actions. They're not built for heavy hand-to-hand, long-term fighting. And so what you're going to want to watch out for is going up against feudal lords that look like they don't have a lot of troops. Yeah, they may not have a lot of troops, but perhaps they have a boatload of heavy infantry or heavy cavalry, knights. So what you're going to look to do is in battles, want to take advantage of that skirmish phase where you have a lot of light infantry and archers, and try and win it in the skirmish phase. Because if you get to the melee phase, you may get tore up. Alright, so just kind of keep that in mind. As far as purchasing items is concerned, be aware that prestige is really the name of the game. This is reason number one for why I say you're going to be involved in a lot of battles and a lot of combat and want a strong martial lord, because prestige is going to drastically go up based on the number of battles and wars that you win. And in turn, you can then use that prestige for, among other things, building more items in your town. So here, you can raise your levy size, more light infantry, more archers, and so on and so forth. Now, you do have some money that you can spend on things. So like a market, you can raise your taxable income a little bit. You do need, I want to say, a level 3 hill fort to convert to feudalism. But you also can get a levy size increase from that, so there's an advantage to that. But for the most part, you don't really have any castle walls. And you also don't really have any taxable income. Notice 1.9 versus, like 12 or whatever you're going to have in a feudal holding. So that's the big trade-off, is that you get more prestige, which you then can use to build more items in your counties, but you're not going to have a whole lot of taxable income, and so you're going to have to find other ways to get it, such as raiding, which I will cover in a moment. Next step. Alright, religion. So, sorry, I've got a list of notes here trying to keep myself on task so I don't bounce all over the place on you. Religion. So here is another significant difference between the tribal holdings and that of the Western world, or the feudal world, is when you start off, you don't have an organized reformed religion. You do have the Nordic faith, all right? As you can see here, you can reform it at some point, but you don't have a religious head. So basically what you have is you have all these different countries or tribes who believe in, loosely held beliefs with regards to Nordic faith, but nothing really organized, okay? What you can do, though, is over time, get it to a situation where you can actually organize, or what's called reform the faith. One of the ways you can do that is you can get to 50% moral authority. How you do that is just lots of holy wars, either against, the Slavs, the Baltics, the Finns, or the Catholic Church, and get it up to 50. That can also go down, though, if you get holy warred by the Catholics and lose the holy war. Or what you can do is you can grab hold of at least 3 holy sites, and then I want to say, okay, so you need 50% and hold 3 holy sites. So you need both. But once you do that, then what you can do is reform the faith. So the holy sites are, if you click the religious tab, these white areas right here. All right. And the way to find it is you focus here, and this tells you all the different priests who hold the counties that are holy sites. As you can see, the green flag means that the Nordic faith holds 3 of these, but not these 2. And I want to say when it says you need at least 3, like, no kidding, means you, the ruler, needs to be holding 3, not the Nordic faith holds 3. But what will happen is if you yourself, the ruler, hold these 3, and you have 50% moral authority, you can, if you want, reform the faith. Why, pray tell, Proto-Bro, would I want to do that? Very good question you ask. Here are the reasons why. All right, you get succession laws. So you get yourself in a position where you can start modifying your succession laws to be more favorable to your gameplay, perhaps. Okay. You no longer suffer prestige loss while at peace. So again, if you're kind of tired of constant warfare, because that's what you really need to do to keep your prestige up, which allows you to buy more buildings and raise tribal troops, which I'll show you in a moment, and you're kind of sick and tired of that, you want to kind of throttle back and be a little more strategic about how you do things. Maybe that's another reason why you would want to reform the faith. You have less trouble with independent-minded vassals. So examples would be, maybe vassals who are ambitious However, and this is, no, these are the big dingers, right? So this is why it's kind of, I think, a judgment call at what point you want to reform the faith. You lose the ability to raid, which can be a big, big moneymaker. County conquest and subjugation Casus Belli are no longer available to you, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And defensive supply limit penalties for religious enemies in their territory. That means that if the Catholics, for example, the Carolinian Empire here, say they holy ward us, right? They have better troops, so head-to-head we'd get our butt kicked. What we could do is a war of attrition, which means kind of pull back slowly. And what we do is we get a defensive bonus in our territory. And so if they attack us, we can wait until the right moment when we have the right terrain. Maybe they've suffered significant attrition losses due to the weather and besieging our various counties. And then at some point we can engage in, basically a full-scale battle with them and receive the bonuses of additional defensive bonuses because we're fighting in our territory. So that's one of the advantages that tribal kingdoms get, is that added defensive bonus. And then finally, vassals will get upset if you have their levies raised for too long. So that's kind of the equivalent of your feudal lords being upset when you have their troops raised for too long. Okay, so those are the big pros and cons to reforming your faith. I think at some point you want to do it. I always call it's like feudal. It's going feudal. It's feudal light. Okay, so instead of going full on feudal, reforming the faith is kind of your midway between being tribal and being feudal. And then at that point, I think you either say I'm going to stick with this, or you make the next step, which is go feudal. But I think this is a good kind of middle of the road transition for you. And then also too, if you control 3. You also have a significant influence and control over your religious head, who will then give you, authorization to do holy wars and so forth. All right. So expanding your kingdom. How do we expand our kingdom? A couple different ways. Option number 1, and this is one of my favorite. If you look at your ruler, you look at your de jure title. The de jure title here is Kingdom of Denmark, which encompasses all these areas right here. Cool, I want to become the King of Denmark. How do I do it? Well, I can't do it yet because I only control... Well, I control 69%, so we could do it right now, right? But let's say we didn't. Let's say we controlled 48%, right? How do we expand it? We can do what's called a subjugation war. So if we take somebody within our kingdom, even if they're of the same religious faith as we are, you can do a subjugation claim. So as you see here, pagans are allowed to subjugate other pagan rulers, which are part of their capital de jure kingdom. They can only do this once in a lifetime, unless they also have the Become a King ambition. So, if we do subjugation and we win this war, we get all 3 of these counties for basically the price of one war, right? So we could basically take over all of Denmark with 1 war, which would be this here. Now, bear in mind, it says you can only do this 1 time in a lifetime. So if there were 2 enemies or 2 opponents in our kingdom here, we'd only be able to use subjugation on 1 of them. All right. Then you'll have to find other creative ways to go to war. Make tributary we cannot do, but if they were of a different religious faith, for example, we could certainly do that. We could do conquest. Pagans and nomads can conquer single border counties without a specific reason. Norse pagans can also take any coastal county. So see, that's why we can do that. If we weren't Norse, we would be limited to those areas directly next to us. But these are coastal, so we can go after anybody. It's like this guy here. So that's option number 2. You get subjugation, which was the one I just showed you here. Then you have conquest, which is you can conquer single border counties. So I want to say single border counties. I don't know if that's border of you yourself or how that works. I think that is. That's why we can only do the coastals. So if our ruler was here, then we could do that guy there. So subjugation, conquest. Another really fun one that's unique is invasion. So say Astoria, that looks pretty juicy. We wanted to go after Astoria. We could do what's called prepare invasion. All right. So once you get enough prestige, as you can see here, 1,000 prestige, you can organize an invasion. You can only do it once in your ruler's lifetime, and it takes you can take up to 2 years to organize a mass of warriors to take down with you to engage in the invasion. It could be warriors that you've recruited, that you've rallied up. Maybe other rulers say, hey, that sounds like a great idea, I want to come along too. And then at some time you fire it, and then you invade Astoria, and if you win that invasion, you take over the entire kingdom. So it's a pretty powerful thing. That's what's going on here. He is actually doing an invasion right here. And I think he's doing the invasion of England, the entire English continent. How do I figure out who he is? I think it says who we are. Oops. Invasion of Lothian. And the invasion of East Anglia. So that's this guy. So there. So that is an invasion. And what will happen is, allies or people of that particular faith or culture may jump into that war to help out. So that's the downside to an invasion, is if we went down here and attacked him, I don't think we have to worry about too much here, but maybe this guy here jumps in to help him out. And then, if he's got an alliance with him, maybe he jumps in or whatever. But so that's invasion. So you get subjugation, conquest, invasion, and then holy war. So let's see here. Can we do a little holy? Let's do. So here's your conquest because he's a coastal. That's why Norse are just awesome, because you can just do so many coastal invasions. It really is pretty cool. Okay, so we can also do holy wars though. I don't think you have to wait until you reform the faith. I might be wrong on that. Yeah, can use the holy war cast. Okay, so you don't get the holy war till you reform. So that's obviously another reason why you may want to reform, is you can do the holy war. Okay, so those are the various ways to expand your kingdom. The other ways are pretty self-explanatory. You can do a fabricate claim, so that's obvious. You can also push claims of other claimants. Those sort of stereotypical ways. And then also too, I forgot to mention, your ambitions are all going to be the same. Your focus is going to be the same as feudal. Those aren't different. Okay, so raise tribal armies. So this is another reason why your prestige, having high prestige, is very important. You saw that it requires prestige to do an invasion. It costs prestige to build things in your county. It also costs you prestige to do raise tribal armies. So what does that mean? That means when you are attacked, when you're at war, you can spend 500 prestige to raise a tribal army. And here you can see you would get 1,956 troops for 500 prestige, and it would cost you $1.58 per month, which is actually a lot when you consider you're only making 0.52 a turn or a month. But what will happen is that these guys will remain raised until either they're destroyed or the war is over. Now there is one little way to kind of be gamey with this, is that if you pause the game at the conclusion of a war, right? So you have a 100 war score, for example. You pause the game, you click the ruler, you agree to terminate the conflict. If you keep it paused and start another war, so you basically lower your levies, disband your levies, your tribal army is still raised, you then declare war on somebody else, and then you unpause it, you will not lose your tribal army. Take that for what you will, it's entirely up to you. I think the concept of the game was to say, hey, 500 prestige per war. And so yes, it is gamey, but hey, if you want to do it, play it, whatever's fun for you, right? But just be aware of that these will disband upon conclusion of a war, unless you have the game paused and you start another war. All right. Notice here, commissioning a runestone. This is just basically a fancy way for the tribal kingdoms to say, hey, I want to talk about how great I am, and so they put this on this runestone, which then raises the opinion that you have with your allies for a period of time. It also increases your prestige per turn, per month. Great blot rather, same thing. This raises your piety and your opinion with the priests. And I'm not sure if it improves your faith or your opinion with your vassals. It may. It's possible. Alright. Let's see. What else here? My notes fell off. Okay, making money. That's right. Okay, so last but not least, making money. How do we make money as a tribe? You really can't rely on taxable income. That didn't do anything for you. You can't really count on building more buildings to get your taxable income up because you're only going to get 0.50. So really then, what are you left with? You are left with raiding. So if you're unfamiliar with raiding, I will give you a very quick illustration, but I'm going to give you some tips on how raiding works, how to maximize it, and so forth. Alright. So first you click this here, put raiding. That way they aren't going to besiege a town without collecting money. They also aren't going to look for a fight unless they're actually engaged by, you know, the enemy. Okay, there. Okay, so now with the Nords, you can actually stream down rivers. And so we can go down here, which is what we're going to do. And this is basically going to be your money maker. This is going to be your taxes, basically. So you just have to be more proactive than you do as a feudal lord to get your taxes. But I like to focus on churches. They are much easier to get money from and quicker. And if you're lucky enough to catch a ruler when he's involved in a war, he may not be able to send troops to do anything about it. So, for example, were we to land here, notice his garrison, his levies are already raised. They're out up here somewhere. So it's possible, including these here, it's possible we could land here, and as long as we landed with more than 492 troops, we could get past the castle walls, get it all the way down, and then perhaps raise this castle here for lots of money. So that's what you want to look for, is look for countries that are at war, that have their levies raised. You can kind of come in the back door and raid them. Otherwise, what you can do is what we're doing here. So here, we are going to, they have 26.9 total taxable income here. Currently, they have pretty good defenses. You see the castle wall is all the way up here. We can only loot 4.3 cash before we hit the walls. However, if we have more attackers than defenders, which we don't here, then we go past this wall all the way down until we've looted everything except really like burn the place down and take literally everything. In order to burn the place down, we would have to besiege this place all the way down to 0, and then this place would catch fire, be like basically a heaping mess. But we'd also get a bunch more money out of it. Kind of think of it this way. Here we're actually taking the cash. We get through the walls. We take like the stashed away cash. This place catches on fire. Now we're walking out with like the golden chalices, the golden crosses, the silver plates, all of that stuff, which ends up being worth a lot of money. So if you can raise a place, that's a great thing to do from a tribal standpoint. You get a whole bunch more money out of it. Otherwise, what you can do is just kind of hang out here for just a little bit, get it down to like maybe here, hop back on your ship, move on to the next county, and so forth. And just try and avoid aggressive armies that are going to come after you, try and flush you out, because chances are is if they do that, you're not going to survive long. They will destroy you, and then it ends up being a money loss for you, not a money gain. So here's same thing, and I usually use 3 armies of about 500 troops, unless I'm looking to torch the place. Then obviously I'll come in with like 1,200 troops or whatever. But now, although your troops are cheaper to raise than feudal, notice here, this is negative 224 a month. So in order to make this a moneymaker, you need to be raiding more than 224 a month, right? So that's something that you'll have to kind of watch and make sure you're basically collecting enough money to really make this worth it. So that's really the main way to make money as a tribal. If you are not the Norse, if you are the Slavs or the Baltic or the Finns, You can still do raiding. You can only do it on your neighbors, though. So that means is you can't do coastal like you can with the Norse unless you have ships to go. But usually a lot of these guys, especially at this time, don't have enough ships to make raiding worth it. And so what you'll end up doing is you have to raid other tribal, which is just really not worth the money. For example, here he's got 1.5 taxable income, right? Versus this guy who's got 26.9. So raiding other tribes is just really not worth it. You've really got to go after the feudal guys or Orthodox, Roman Orthodox or whatever, to get the money. I've seen people come all the way down here and do raiding. You definitely can do that. It's really, it's a matter of preference, but the name of the game with tribal is you always want to be raiding. It's got to be a core theme and theory of your gameplay is repeated, constant raiding, invading something, right? Alright, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is Gavelkind, and I will be right back. Hopefully I'm going to find a ruler where I can illustrate how Gavelkind works. Alright, so what I did is I went and created a custom character, gave him 3 children under a Gavelkind system here, just to give you an illustration of how Gavelkind works. So I think the best way to understand Gavelkind is to, one, understand that for every child that's born who is a biological child, or it's a biological child, they are entitled by law under Gavelkind to some territory, right? A county. Now, one of the advantages to this as tribal is that you don't suffer a penalty on piety or rather on prestige for your unlanded sons, right? Because they're already entitled to land. So that's one of the advantages to having that. Obviously, the disadvantage is you can't really control who gets what necessarily, right? So in this instance here, we've got this Jarl. He's the Jarl of all here. I don't even know how to pronounce that, so I'm not going to try. But he has essentially 4 titles. He's got the Jarldom, or the Kingship, which is all here, right? He has the Duchy, which is this right here, Upland. And then he has 2 counties. He's got Sudermanland and what is this? Gastrickland. Alright, so basically he's got 4 counties, or rather 3 counties, and the kingdom. The way Gavelkind works is that for every child born, the distribution of the lands gets spread out more and more. So in this case we have 3, right? So this means the primary child is going to get the top 2 titles. And what I mean by that is if you're a duke, then they will get the duchy title and basically the capital that the duchy resides in. And then if you have then from there everything starts getting divided up. Okay, so in this case, because we have 3 children, and we are I want to say what's our laws here? Agnostic, so only males can inherit. So we had if we had 1 male and 3 girls, then the 1 male would just get all 4 of these, right? But because we have 2 other boys here, these don't all go to the first oldest child. We have to ensure that these guys at least get something. And so then what we'll do is we say, okay, you get this. So he gets the kingship. He gets the duchy, along with the county that's there. And then these guys get the last 2 counties. So he will get this, and he will get that. Now, what happens if one of these guys dies from sickness or death via, assassination or battle, and we only have 2 sons? Well, then what will happen is that he will still get the kingship, he will still get the duchy and the county, and then he will get 2 counties. And you kind of say, well, why wouldn't he get like 3 counties? Well, because these are weighted more, they're worth more points. I guess you'd say they're more valuable. And so to offset that, he gets 2 counties. So he would serve under him, but nevertheless, he would still get 2 counties as opposed to that. So how do you play Gavelkind with that understanding in mind? My opinion is you want to have as many children as possible, and you want to expand your kingdom as much as possible after you have a higher title to give your oldest son. So what I mean by that is if we were say we're Upland, and we were just a count, and we had all of this territory, and we were just a count, then what would happen is upon death, all 3 of these would get their counties. They would get, these 4 counties here would be spread out among the 3 of them, but none of them would be beholden to the other. Now, they would be allies, but they wouldn't fall under one kingdom because you don't have a higher crown authority above the other ones. So what you need to do first and foremost in Gavelkind is establish at least a duchy in your first generation. That way, when your first ruler dies, your oldest son will get the duchy, and then one county. And then these two will get their counties, but they will fall underneath the oldest son. Okay? So that's first rule of thumb, is to ensure that you do at least have one higher level holding. So a duchy. To ensure that they fall under. Now, what do you do if you have two duchies? So this is where it can get problematic. It's under Gavelkind, if you have two duchies, then what would happen is he would get a duchy, and he would get a duchy. Now, not a problem in this scenario because we have a king title, which goes to him. But if you have just two duchies and you don't have a crown title, then what would happen is upon death, he would get his duchy, he would get his duchy, and they would split off separately. Again, allies, dynasty allies, but nevertheless not under the same rule, and they would also each have claims to each other's territory, which could create definitely some problems down the road, right? So that's rule number 2, is make sure that your highest title, you only have one of them, right? So in this case, we don't want two king titles. So we don't want to go create the Kingdom of Sweden and then go over and create the Kingdom of Norway. Because what will happen under Gavelkind is at some point when we die, and we have two sons, one son will get the Kingdom of Sweden, the other son will get the Kingdom of Norway, and now we are split. So again, I think that the really kind of foot stomp on this, the real bottom line is for Gavelkind, make sure you have just one superior title per ruler if you don't want to split. And the same thing for the duchies. You can have two duchies, that's fine, as long as you have one king title. Because then what will happen is if we had two duchies here, this guy would get a duchy, this guy would get a duchy, but he'd also get a king title, and so he would still fall underneath him. Alright, so you still might have the issues of super dukes who are dynasty members that have a claim to your title. That's fine. As long as you all fall underneath here, I've found that's the best way to go about it. Now, it's not the worst case in the world, right, to have separate kingdoms that are dynasty but are not associated with your kingdom, because you still have claims to those lands, and you can enforce it. So, Gavelkind can be really fun, it's really cool, can be very dynamic, unpredictable, difficult to do, but it definitely encourages you to wage war as much as humanly possible. I think it also encourages you to have as many children as possible, because then what will happen is if you have, like, say, 7 titles, and you have 7 children, then each one's going to get one county. They're all going to have claims against each other, and so they're all going to be fighting with one another, which kind of keeps them weak. Whereas if you only have 2 or 3 children, and then you give out, your 2 or 3, say they each of them get 3 counties each, or each of them get a duchy each, now you've got 3 dukes who all have claims against one another, who are now battling it out with one another, and that could be far more problematic as a king dealing with that situation. So, in summary, Gavelkind, be aggressive, expand, have lots of kids, and make sure you have only one of your most superior title, whether it's one duchy, one kingship. If you have one kingship, then you can have multiple duchies, that's fine. But just make sure that if you're a duke, you only have one duchy, because you have 2 duchies, and you die, you will not be able to, your kingdom will split to 2 separate duchies. Alright, so hopefully that helped. If you have any other questions about Gavelkind succession, please let me know. I was trying to make that tight while at the same time nail the big pointers on Gavelkind. And maybe I'll end up doing a playthrough at some point with the Gavelkind succession so you can see it in action. And with that, thanks for watching the tutorial. Again, please, if this was helpful, like it, and also comment if there's anything additional you'd like to see or have any more questions.